Okay, so now we are ready to add the functionality so that we can actually see the slots in the inventory. So you actually have to open up your chest inventory script again, and inside the chest inventory script we will have to add a new function, and this function is going to be called update layout. So under your create layout we're going to create public void update layout. So why do we need this function? Well, every time we enter a new chest in our game world, we'll need to update the layout in our UI to reflect the layout that specific chest wants to have. For example, we need to have the correct layout for the right amount of rows, the right amount of slots, and we need to contain all the items that this specific chest contains. So this is what we're going to do in update layout. So we'll create update layout, and it needs to take no parameters right now. We're going to add them in a few moments. So update layout kind of works the same way as our inventories create layout. So basically we can take some functionality here and copy paste it so that we don't have to do the exact same thing again. I think we can take and copy paste from the line that says hover Y offset here, and then go all the way down after the if for loops here and copy this, and then go into the chest inventory and paste it. So right now we have copied everything we need from our inventory into our chest inventory. This part of the new slot with the click on click thing, we don't need that. We're going to place it somewhere else later, so just delete that line. In the top here we need the new slot line, but we need to change it a little around. So just we're going to write a note out here, edit later, because the point is right here we are instantiating a new slot, and we're not interested in instantiating a slot. We are interested in taking one of the slots that is already created for our chests. For example, one of those 50 slots we created for our test, and we're going to show that slot. So instead of creating new slots on the get-go, we're just going to reuse one old slot we have stored in our chest inventory. So basically we are going to find one of the slots here, and we're going to enable it, because right now we're going to disable them as standard. So when we walk into an inventory with 20 slots, for example, then we're going to take 20 of these slots in here, enable them to make them visible, and place them correctly inside the canvas, so that we can use them to navigate around in our chest. Right here we have the slot breaks transform. That's fine, we need to do that exactly the same way. The name of the slot has already been set up here in our create layout, so we don't need to do anything here. Let me zoom it a little so it's easier for you to see. And what else? We still need to set the parent, and we still need to set the local position. That's fine. The slot rect here is also fine, and we're setting the correct parent again here. That's fine. And then is another thing we need to change, because we don't need to add the slot to new slots, all slots, because we already have it inside all slots, so we're not going to add it again. So instead of this we need to delete it, and we need to add some new functionality for just write edit later, add items to slot. Okay, so let's go to the top here and change this line of code now when we are here. So what we need to do is to access the list of all the slots here, called all slots. We need to access that one and pick a specific slot in there and enable it. So basically whenever we create a new slot, we need to set it as disabled so that it's not enabled from the get-go. So in here we also need to say new slot dot set active false. So if we save this, we can't even test it because we have some code here we need to fix. Let's just outcome these two for now. Yeah. So if you save this, if you fix the small errors here by outcoming in the code and saving, then you'll notice if we go out here, this is just for testing, go out here in Unity, you'll see that all these slots here are not active anymore. They're grayed out, as you can see. So they're all not visible, which means that we can open up our inventory and see nothing, but if that chest has 20 slots, then it should select 20 of those slots and enable them so we can see them in here in our game. So basically we can delete this line of code with empty slots. We don't need that, but I think we need the hover offset Y, or maybe we don't. Now we're not using it anywhere here, so we can also delete that one for now. We can always add it again if we need it. So let's save this. So now we need to add the functionality so that we are not instantiating our new objects whenever we are going to enable them. So we're going to create a new integer here called index equals 0. So we're going to start on index 0, and this index is going to be used to find a slot in here. So the index is going to find one of these slots here, and then it's going to enable it so that we can see it on our screen. So let's say instead of this line of code, we're going to delete it, and we're going to say game object new slot equals all slots index. So we're going to find an item inside all slots, and down here we're going to say index plus plus and save. Okay, so now we can enable an amount of slots, but we need to tell this function how many slots it needs to enable, or how many slots it needs to enable. So we can add a function, not a functionality, a field up here, or an argument called integer rows and integer slots. So this is going to tell this function how many slots the current inventory needs and how many rows they should be divided on. So basically we already had something called rows and slots, and the reason that it didn't complain is because our inventory already has these variables called rows and slots, but we are going to override them by adding these local variables up here. So it's going to use the slot amount from the function when we call it, instead of using the slot amount that is there stored up here inside the variables here. There's also something called slot here. So we are overriding that basically down in our chest inventory, so that each chest again can have its own amount. So now that we have made this function for setting up all the slots, well, then we need to call it, and we're going to call it from our chest script. So whenever our player enters the chest, well, then we're going to show the correct amount of slots. So we are going to make a new function called public void onTrigger enter, and we're going to say collider other, and actually we can just make this private. And in here we are going to say if other. So if it's a player, other.tag, if that's a player that collides with the chest, then we are going to say chest inventory dot update layout, the function we just created, and we're going to say, well, it's going to use the amount of rows we have, and we're going to use the amount of slots we have. So you can see this is called row. Maybe we should change this to rows instead. So now we are actually updating our layout whenever our player enters the chest. Let's try to run the code and give it a go, see what happens. First of all, we also need to check, the player is not tagged as a player right now, so we need to tag him as a player for this functionality to work, because we, on our trigger enter, we're checking if his tag is player, and if he's not tagged as a player, then of course this code is never going to trigger. So let's see if we go back here, run the game. Let's see, we have our slots here. They are all disabled, as you can see. Maybe it's hard to see on the video, but they are basically, all of them are grayed out right now. So if our player enters here, And you see, okay, we got a divided by 0 exception. So what did we forget? Yeah, we forgot to set the amount of rows and the amount of slots we have, of course. So basically, we can clear this and say that we want 10 rows. Sorry, not 10 rows. We want 2 rows and we want 10 slots. So 2 times 5. Let's try again and run into this, and let's check. And the amount of slots are not set to enabled here, as I can see. So we need to figure out why this doesn't work. So let's stop running the game and figure out what's wrong. And I actually think there's a very good explanation for why this doesn't work. If you jump back into your script in the chest inventory, I think I forgot to enable them again, because when we create the slots, we're setting them active as false, so we disable them. And I forgot to enable them again. So down here inside the update layout, you would need to say new slot that set active to true. There we go. So now that it has been set to active, we should be able to see them and open our inventory. So let's save this and jump back in and run the game. We'll see we have our chest, and it has 4 rows of 20 slots. And if we jump into the chest and open it, we'll see we have these 4 rows of 20 slots. If we close it and we change this to 10, for example, and we have 2 rows, then the change should still happen. If we open it up again, you'll see that it looks different in the shape and the size. So now we can dictate how many slots, and we can write how many slots each chest has, because as you can see, we are not using any of the functionality from the chest inventory, the size of the chest inventory here. It's simply used up here from the chest. Right now I'm not sure if the slot size should be decided from the chest, so we might as well remove it, and we can always add it later, but I'm pretty sure we're not going to use it. So if you go into the chest script and go to the line where we declare these variables, we can just delete the slot size like this, because we don't really need it. I think we'll always add it if we do. Now we need to be able to take the items from the chest and move them into the visual chest that we're using into the UI here, and we need to be able to put the items inside that UI and store them in the chest. And to do that, we need to update our update inventory function. We need to change something in here. So if we go to the chest inventory script and go to the update layout function, then we need to add some more functionality for it. So basically we need to add some more here. We need to say that whenever we update the layout, we need to give it a list of stacks of items or of slots, so that we can show the correct items inside the chest to the viewer or to the user of the game. So list stack item script, and we're just going to call this items. So these are the items that we'll need whenever we update our layout and whenever we want to show the player what is inside the chest. Yeah, that's basically it. I don't think we need anything else from here. So basically we need to store these items somewhere. So right now we have this chest items here, and these are the local items that we're showing to the player, and we need to set them equal to, so this dot what did I call it, chest items are equal to items. So now we are storing them inside chest items here so that we can use them later. And we also need to store, we have the chest slots up here, we also need to say this dot chest slots equal slots, because we might need it later. So now we have stored the 2 variables we need, this one, and the rows are just used to set up the layout. So, but the slots and the items are going to be used somewhere else. So right now it's complaining that it doesn't have the right overload here, and the reason of that is because we're not giving it the right things, because just before we changed this the arguments that the update layout needs. So inside the chest script here, we are going to put the right arguments, and it wants the all slots first, and then it wants the rows, and in the end it wants the slots. So that's right. So now we have fixed those errors here, because now we are adding all the slots to the inventory. So now we can use those items for something. So let's jump into the chest inventory and scroll all the way down. And underneath the update layout, we are going to create a new function called public void, not ping, but public void, move items to chest. So what this is going to do is going to take all the items we just, we opened the chest, right? And when the chest is open, we're going to take some items and put inside the chest. And this move items to chest is going to make sure that all these items we just put inside the chest will be stored inside the correct chest when we close the inventory, so that we can open the inventory or the chest up later and show all these items again to the user that just opened up the chest. So let's save this. Okay, so first of all we need to clear the chest items, because if we just had another chest open and we open another one, we need to clear out the layout to contain the new items we just looked at. If we don't clear out the inventory, we are going to have mixed items from one chest and another when we're showing it to the player. So we need to say chest items.clear to make sure that we clear everything. After that we need to make a for loop, and this for loop needs to run through all the slots that we have in the chest. So we need to run through it like chest slots here, the amount of slots we have. And then we are going to take each slot, and we're going to make sure that we add the correct items to that slot so we can see what's inside the slot. I'm gonna make slot temp slot equals all slots I that get component slot. So right now we are looking at every single slot inside the chest, and we are creating a reference to that specific slot so that we can use it later. So we take every slot and we need to say, well, what kind of items does this slot need to contain when we're moving the items into the chest instead of having them visual for the player. So if temp slot is empty, if it isn't empty, then we need to store something, because if the slot is empty, then we don't need to put anything inside the chest. But if it isn't empty, then we need to take the items on the slot and put them inside the chest. And we do that by saying chest items.add new stack, a new stack of items, right? Item script, and we're going to say temporary slot.items. So what this does is that it takes all the items on this current slot we are looking at and moves them, or copies them at least, to the chest items here, so we have them later when we want to open it up. And then we need to clear the slot, but we only need to clear it if the inventory isn't open. So if we add something to an inventory, load or save later, then we're going to say if slot, what is it called, if it's open, if this inventory is open, sorry. Then we're going to say temporary slot.clear slot. So we're not going to clear the slot if it is open, it only if it isn't open, then we're going to clear it. We'll see later in the load and save function how this works. Okay, so if the slot isn't empty, or it is empty, sorry, we're going to make an else statement here. And then we're going to say chest items.add new stack item script. There we go. So we're going to add an empty stack of items to an empty slot, so when we load it, we don't get anything else out. So this is basically to prevent the value of null inside the chest items. So we're just adding an empty stack instead. And if the if the items if is open, if it isn't open, then we're going to say all slot I does set active to false. So when we move everything from our inventory to the chest, well, then we're simply gonna say set active to false, so that the objects are not active anymore, because we're going to use this this function here for lots of other things. So that's why this if statement is here, for example, when we load and save, or when we move away from a chest. Okay, so where do we need to call this? Well, we basically need to call this when we are stopping the collision with the chest, and we need to call it when we close the chest as well. But it's something we want to do when the chest is done fading out, because if we do it right away when we start closing the chest and there is time before it fades out, well, then the player will be able to see that the item disappears from the slots because it's still little visible. So we need to do it when it's fading. And to be able to do that, we need to override the fade out function. I don't know if we already made it virtual. Let's see. Fade out, I think it's called. Not in selection. There's a coroutine fade out. If I could only find it. Sorry, I'm wasting time looking at this. Here we go. Okay, so we have a private I enumerator called fade out. Sorry, I have a hard time talking these days because I have lots of allergies. So maybe it's hard to understand what I'm saying, but I hope it's understandable. We're going to make this one protected, and we're going to make it virtual, so that we can access it from our scripts that inherit from it. So protected virtual I enumerator fade out, and we're going to go back to our chest inventory, and in here we are going to write protected override, and we're going to find fade out, and we are going to write yield return base, not base, but we're going to return start coroutine base dot fade out. And this is basically just how you call a coroutine that you override. So this is just to be able to call the normal coroutine that makes sure that the inventory fades out when we close it. And down here after this we are going to take, say, move items, move to chest, there we go. So when we're done fading out the inventory when we close it, let's just do like this. When we open it up, then it's gonna fade in, and when we close it like this, then when it's done fading out here, we're gonna move all the items to the chest so they are not stored in the slots that we have in here. And the reason that we're doing that is because maybe I'm going to open up another chest, and then I'm going to reuse these slots to show what's inside that chest. But if I didn't clear these slots or move the items inside this other chest, well, then the items are still going to be shown. Maybe if this chest here has 10 items in it, it has all the items here, and I close it down and I go and open another chest, well, then those 10 items are still going to be shown inside these slots if I don't move them from the slots into the inventory. And as you can see here, the slots are hidden. If I open it up like this, you'll see that it's hidden now because we're not calling the function for showing the slots again. But we also need to create that. So also inside the chest scripts on trigger enter here, we need to call the function. So here we need to write chest inventory dot move items to chest to make sure we move them into the chest. If we run out of one inventory, we need to move them before we open up the next one, for example. But before we start moving items from the chest into the visual inventory again, I would like to be able to place some items inside the chest, because if we run our game right now, we won't be able to put any items inside the chest here. You'll see that nothing happens if I click on the buttons here. And the reason that nothing happens is because the onClick function has never been assigned. This onClick function here is not assigned from the script, but we already did that with all our other slots. So you also need to add that onClick function here. And we can do that by saying new slot dot get component button dot on click dot add listener. Okay, so if you can't find the button here, the button namespace, you'll need to go up here in the top and write using Unity engine.ui to access this class. When we've created that, we can make two normal parentheses here, not a scope, and we can make a delegate and open a scope, and inside that delegate we'll say move item and tell that item it should move from the new slot, and finish it here and finish there. So basically this adds the on-click functionality for the button. It's nothing new, we already did it in another part of the tutorial series. Let's see. If we run our game now, open up the slots, inventory, we should be able to take something and place it inside the inside the chest now, as you can see. And as you will see, if I move away here, I move back in and press E, the chest is empty. And that's what we're going to have a look at in the next part of this this tutorial here, because I'm going to wrap this one up. So in the next part we're going to be able to bring the items back from the chest, because right now we're storing them in the chest, but they're never brought back when we reopen the chest. So I hope to see you in the next part of this series.